The air inside the auditorium was dense with pride and perfume. I sat near the back legs crossed at the ankle spine, straight pretending not to feel every glance sliding in my direction once my last name echoed through the space. Dr. Marshall Ellison, the announcer, boomed, "Class of '92 and proud parent of this year's valedictorian." Applause erupted. I barely blinked. My father approached the podium with that familiar surgeon's gait, measured, confident, in total control. He adjusted his cufflinks with the same care he used to correct my posture as a child. He didn't glance toward me, not once. "Being a physician is about precision," he began, "and raising a child who becomes one is no less exacting." The audience chuckled appreciatively. My brother Julian was beaming from his seat up front, the gold cords around his shoulders catching the light. I couldn't blame him. He'd worked hard. And unlike me, he'd stayed in line. My father went on painting a polished portrait of Julian's childhood curiosities, his disciplined intellect, his legacy of excellence. I'd heard versions of this speech before at dinners and donor letters during his hospital's annual galas, but this time it was personal. He was standing at the summit of our family's expectations, and from up there, it seemed I didn't exist. Then it came. At least one of our children made us proud. No pause, no wince, just clinical delivery. The room didn't gasp. They laughed. Soft, unbothered laughter like it was an inside joke. My throat tightened, but I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I kept my face blank and nodded once, as if someone else's name had been dropped like a guillotine. My mother clapped politely, eyes fixed on the stage. Karis, my youngest sister, sat next to me stiff. She didn't turn her head, but her hand brushed mine for just a second, quiet and deliberate. Julian hadn't looked back once. I wouldn't have either. What they didn't know, what none of them saw, was the car key in my palm. A slim, black fob resting quietly between my fingers. The logo wasn't visible from here. That wasn't the point. I hadn't driven down from New York to compete. I'd come to show up for Julian, for myself, and maybe for Karis, who still lived inside their walls. The applause swelled again as my father stepped down, shaking hands with the dean. My mother rose for a photo. I stayed seated back row, watching them from a distance that was no longer emotional, it was strategic. Outside, down a sloped path near the side lot, the Lamborghini sat quietly where I'd parked it. Hidden for now, but not for long. I'd left New York before sunrise. The city hadn't even started humming yet, just a few delivery trucks, a jogger or two, and the glow of the streetlights bouncing off the hood of my Lamborghini Urus. I took the West Side Highway up and out, windows cracked, radio off. The silence felt earned. Most people assumed I bought the car to show off. Let them. It wasn't about that. It was about standing in a dealership handing over a check with my own name on it, no cosigner, no approval required, and watching a sales rep realize I wasn't someone's assistant or lucky wife. I was the CEO. HealthBridge Technologies wasn't meant to be a company. It started as a frustration, a what-if, born out of a failed clinical rotation and a whiteboard in my tiny studio apartment. My idea, a real-time AI-based patient deterioration monitor that could flag subtle declines before a nurse even noticed. My professor said it was ambitious but naive. I said nothing and built it anyway. The first 2 years nearly broke me. I maxed out credit cards, lived on dollar pizza, and worked part-time as a temp just to afford rent on an apartment with no windows. The day I couldn't make payroll, I took out a second mortgage on that same windowless unit. That was the same week my father stopped returning my calls. And now, 4 years later, 3 of the largest hospital systems in the Northeast had partnered with us. Last month, we closed Series C funding. A week ago, we hired our 40th employee. Yesterday, Forbes ran a piece calling us the silent revolution in patient safety. And today, I was parked at my brother's graduation 10 feet from a man who still believed I'd wasted my potential. After the ceremony, I waited until the crowd began thinning before heading to the lot. The sun had moved just enough to catch the car's black finish, making it shimmer beneath the oaks. A few students stood nearby, pointing, trying to guess who it belonged to. My heels clicked across the pavement. The conversation around them stopped. I didn't look up. I just pressed the fob once and the car blinked open with a soft mechanical exhale. That's when I heard him. Amara. I turned. My father stood a few paces away, his tie loosened, now jacket slung over one shoulder. His eyes dropped to the car, then back to me. There was a flicker of something disbelief, maybe even discomfort, but he didn't say another word, neither did I. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled out slowly, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as I left the campus behind. They were already lined up by the time I got back to the lawn. My mother stood in the center, smoothing the front of her navy silk dress. Julian was beside her, still glowing from his moment on stage. My father stood on the other end, directing the photographer like he was orchestrating a surgical team. Karis hovered near the back, phone in hand, the only one who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Amara, my mother called, voice brisk. Come join for the family photo. She didn't smile, but then again, she never did when I surprised her by showing up. I walked over and stood next to Karis, but before the photographer could lift his camera, my mother interjected. Maybe put Amara on the end. Her dress doesn't quite match the rest of the palette. I was wearing cream linen. Everyone else was in cool navy soft blush and charcoal. I glanced down at myself and nodded once. Of course, wouldn't want to ruin the aesthetic. I shifted to the far edge just like she asked. Karis looked at me, her expression unreadable, but her hand found mine for a second. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The photographer made a few adjustments, tilting my father's chin up, repositioning Julian's robe, nudging me half a step farther out. I complied. I knew how this went. 3 years ago, they mailed out Christmas cards using a group photo from my cousin's wedding. I'd been standing on the edge in that one too. When the card arrived in the mail, my arm was the only thing left in the cropped version. They didn't even notice the cut. Or if they did, no one mentioned it. Say cheese, the photographer called. I smiled like I meant it. Learned behavior. They took a few more shots, my mother adjusting her posture between each one, my father glancing at his watch. I stepped back when they shifted to take portraits of just the graduates and proud parents. It wasn't stated, but it was understood. As they posed without me, I caught my own reflection in a glass window behind them. Calm, controlled, present, but apart. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Done contorting myself to fit into frames where I was never meant to belong. Done waiting for a space they clearly never intended to offer. Julian glanced back and gave me a nod, quick, sincere, apologetic. I returned it without resentment. His victory was real. It just wasn't mine. I turned away before they finished slipping into the moving crowd. Karis followed a few steps behind, still glued to her phone. Julian showed up at my office the following Wednesday, unannounced. Maya, my COO, poked her head in, looking half curious, half concerned. Your brother's here, she said, raising an eyebrow. He looks conflicted. I told her to send him in. He walked in still wearing his conference badge, a messenger bag slung across his shoulder like a shield. His hair was a little messier than usual, and there were shadows under his eyes. Nice view, he said, looking out toward the skyline. Didn't realize you had the whole floor. I don't, I said. Just to the side with better light. He gave a faint smile and dropped into the chair across from my desk. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. He was trying to find a way in. I let him. I've been thinking, he finally said. About everything. I closed my laptop. Okay, about Hopkins. About whether I'm actually... He paused like the words were stuck in his throat. Whether I'm actually doing it for me. That surprised me more than I let on. Julian had always been the compliant one, never questioned the plan, never pushed back. And I asked gently. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I think I chose neurosurgery because it was the hardest thing in the room. Because Dad would approve. Because it would keep everything quiet. But I did a rotation in pediatric oncology last month and he shook his head. It just felt different, like I was actually doing something that mattered. Something human. I let the silence sit for a moment before answering. So why not pursue that? He looked up. Because you already know the answer. Because Dad will say I'm wasting potential. Because Mom will cry and call it a phase. because I've been the golden child for so long, I don't know who I am without their applause. I stood and walked around to the desk, sitting beside him instead of across. Do you remember when I told them I was leaving med school? He nodded slowly. They acted like you died. I hadn't even figured out what I was building yet, I said. All I knew was that the thing I was becoming wasn't someone I could live with, and it still took me months to say it out loud. He stared down at his hands. I don't want to wake up at 40 and realize I've built a life that fits everyone but me. You won't, I said, because you're asking the question now. He didn't respond right away, but I could see something shifting, the first crack in the script he'd been performing for years. He looked up again this time with something that almost resembled relief. Would you support me? I mean, if I walked away from all of it, I didn't hesitate. Whatever you need. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 3 years. Okay. Then I think I need to make a call. Julian paced the edge of my balcony, his phone in one hand, his other clenched and unclenched like it couldn't decide whether to brace or swing. He'd been rehearsing the conversation for an hour, but we both knew no script would make it easier. I stayed inside, letting him have the space, letting him make the choice. He called just after 8. I heard him say, "Hey, Dad," and then the tone dropped. Not in volume, our father never yelled, but in precision. Like he was back in an OR dissecting a mistake he couldn't tolerate. Julian kept his voice level. He explained his interest in pediatric oncology, his decision to defer the neurosurgery residency. He even thanked him for the opportunities. For a while, I thought maybe it would be enough. Then I saw Julian's posture shift, stiff, defensive. "You're right," he said. "If that means losing your financial support, I'll manage." A beat of silence. No, this isn't about Amara. This is about me. I stepped out quietly just in time to hear him say, "I'm not walking away from medicine, Dad. I'm walking toward the part of it that actually makes sense to me." He ended the call without waiting for a goodbye. Just held the phone in his hand like it had turned heavy. I handed him the glass of water I'd poured earlier. He took it without looking at me, drank half and sat down. "Cut off?" I asked softly. He nodded. Financially, emotionally, symbolically. The full package. He didn't cry, didn't even blink hard, but I knew what it cost him to stand there and not fold. My phone buzzed. Karis Dad's storming around like it's DEFCON 1. Mom's pretending to cry. He keeps saying, "First Amara, now Julian," like it's a disease. I didn't reply. I just turned my screen toward Julian. He smiled, faintly bitter but grateful. Guess we're both contagious. I sat next to him shoulder to shoulder. He exhaled. It's weird. It hurts. But also, it feels right. It is right, I said. They just haven't figured out that love isn't supposed to be conditional. He didn't answer, but the way he sat up straighter told me he was starting to believe it. The subject line read, "Strategic Collaboration Proposal, St. Elias Medical Center." I clicked it without thinking, half expecting a survey or alumni update. But the signature at the bottom stopped me cold. Dr. Lena Harrow, Chief of Innovation, St. Elias Medical, my father's hospital. They weren't reaching out through him. There was no mention of his name, no CC, no back channel. This was formal, direct, and entirely professional. They'd seen our published outcomes, our platform results, and wanted to explore a pilot. For a moment, I just sat there rereading the email. A year ago, this would have twisted something in my chest. I would have wondered if he'd finally changed his mind, finally opened the door. But this wasn't a handout. It was recognition. Earned, not inherited. I forwarded it to Maya with a simple, "Let's move forward. Loop legal in." Then I closed my laptop and stood by the window. Karis FaceTimed me that evening from her bedroom, hair piled in a bun, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands. "You're on our news bulletin," she said, turning the screen so I could see the segment. Local anchor short blurred my face on the side banner, "Ellison Startup Saves ICU Time Lives." Dad didn't say anything, she added, but he turned the volume down halfway through. "Mom asked if you were going to the gala in October." I laughed. "That's a new record, 5 whole months of pretending I'm not dead." Karis grinned, then leaned in. "You know you make it easier to imagine a life outside of them. Like, Maybe I don't have to apply to Duke just because it's the right kind of impressive. Her voice cracked a little at the end, but she didn't blink away. I saw myself in her 13 years younger, still bending to their will, still hoping they'd love the version of her that didn't exist. You don't have to become their story, I said. You can write your own. She nodded quiet for a moment. If I do, I'm putting you in the acknowledgments. I smiled. Just spell my name right. The call ended. I stared at my reflection in the darkened glass. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for them to understand. Not for them to clap. Not for permission to take up space. Julian picked the place, an unassuming Italian spot tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner in the West Village. No reservations, no ceremony. Just 2 siblings and a bottle of wine neither of us could pronounce. He didn't even wait for the bread to arrive. I deferred, he said, setting his phone down like it had just delivered a death sentence. Residency, I asked, even though I already knew. He nodded. Officially. They were surprised, but they respected it. And Dad, a slow breath, still silent. I raised my glass. To breathing without permission. He clinked his glass against mine, then smirked. You know what Kara said. She wants to start the Walker Family Outcasts Club. You and me as co-founders. I laughed. Do we get Jacket's custom embroidery? I'm thinking unapologetically disappointing since 2018. For the first time in years, the silence between us felt safe. No expectations, no performance, just realness. Julian leaned back and looked at me like he was seeing something for the first time. You know I used to think they were ashamed of you. But now, I think they were afraid of what your freedom would reveal. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He was right. Later that night, Kara sent me a photo. Our family's living room bookshelf. 3 of my magazines neatly arranged on the top shelf. Right next to my father's surgical textbooks. Karis. No one said a word. They're just there now. I stared at the image, searching for how it made me feel. Not vindicated, not angry, just finished. Like a wound that had finally closed without fanfare. Julian was crashing at my place that night. As he dozed off on the couch, half wrapped in an old throw blanket, I sat at my desk and opened the folder I'd kept buried in drafts. It was time to RSVP to that gala. This time, not as someone's daughter, but as someone who'd built something worth stepping into the room for. The ballroom shimmered with gold light, all velvet panels and orchestral swells, the kind of place where reputations were polished, not questioned. I stepped in heels, steady breath, even Maya at my side. She looked like a power suit had been made just for her, and technically, it had. The event was for the Legacy in Medicine Award, and of course, my father was the recipient. His name graced the program cover in embossed serif. The bio inside credited him with 30 years of surgical advancement, hospital leadership, and mentorship to a generation of future healers. My name wasn't mentioned, but I hadn't expected it to be. People noticed me as we walked in. Some whispered, a few smiled carefully. The same men who once addressed me as Dr. Ellison's daughter now met my eyes differently, like I'd become something solid enough to cast a shadow of my own. We sat near the middle, not at the front, not at the back, just where we belonged. When my father took the stage, he was crisp as ever, measured voice, slow nods, effortless command. He spoke of excellence, legacy, and pushing boundaries. I listened, sipping from my glass, not with bitterness, but with clarity. The words hadn't changed, but I had. After the applause, the mingling began. I watched him shake hands with people who had once dismissed me in passing, calling my work cute or noble before asking if I'd ever thought of applying to med school again. I didn't approach him, didn't need to. Maya leaned in at one point and whispered, "They keep asking if you're going to speak." I smiled. Let them wonder. Before we left, I paused by the photo display. There he was in black and white, holding Julian as a baby in one frame, posing with a plaque in another. But the one that caught me was a candid him in scrubs, arms crossed, standing just outside an OR. No caption, no context, just a man who spent his life mastering control. And here I was, no longer asking for any of it. As Maya and I stepped into the car, I didn't look back. Not at the ballroom, not at the spotlight, not at him. The night wasn't about being seen. It was about no longer needing to be.